Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 39. With us is the writer and artist Caleb Palmquist. He runs the famed Enkidu Studio, home of modern mythology and a small favor. Today, he just launched his newest Kickstarter for his highly anticipated comic book series, Unicorn Vampire Hunter, which just launched, as I say, just launched today. And as of this recording, it is at 35%, 57 backers so far. So, wow, we're excited to have you here, Caleb.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Is this is like day one? Are you just always hitting refresh on that Kickstarter?
Oh, yeah.
Check it out.
That's how it goes.
That's fun stuff. We would talk before we went on the air that this in itself is you said you haven't seen any of your Kickstarter. This is your fourth Kickstarter. You haven't seen any of the fourth one, correct?
Technically this is my seventh Kickstarter.
Oh.
So I had another account through Enkidu Studio that I was using, and then I switched over to an account with my own name. I thought it was more personable. And so, yeah, this is actually my seventh Kickstarter. And
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And now the seven, this is the one that's gone this quick so far.
Yeah, absolutely. This is we're seeing more success with this one than I've seen with previous Kickstarters for sure.
Wow. Yeah, you're already at as they say, 34% and 29 days to go, 57 backers so far. This is exciting. And I got to say, I am honored and humbled by the fact that being day one of a Kickstarter, which is lots of stuff happening, that you're giving us at least an hour of your time on the first day. So thank you very much.
If nothing else, this is a distraction. So
as I said, we're going to talk a lot about how you work and where you get your ideas and your writing styles and how you collaborate. Because as your studio goes, you've done a lot of successful work so far with some anthologies and your own standalone books that you've written. But first, before we do that, do you want to give the listeners and the viewers kind of a quick background of how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So I am, I've always been interested in telling stories. I grew up in Spokane, Washington, and about 6 years ago, I decided to try writing my own comic book and actually producing it, which ended up being A Small Favor, which is a sci-fi comic book that features like a whole bunch of different artists. And I wrote that with my friend John Grimes. We did a couple of those, and then as I've gone, I've just like met more and more people, done more comics. I did an anthology comic book called Modern Mythology last year. There was a big collection of stories, and then now I'm doing Unicorn Vampire Hunter, which is a fantasy comic that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And when I'm not writing comics, I am a teacher. I'm a high school teacher. I've been doing that for a number of years, and that's basically it. That's me.
And as you mentioned earlier, you kind of got started off by writing A Small Favor, and that was the first. And you wrote that entire thing, correct?
Yeah.
And how long did it? And I guess the question is that, and writers, and you could either say this is true for you or it may agree with this, but usually usually when you write your first one and you get your first one published, the rest seems to, you kind of find that rhythm and you're able to create more you kind of get your feet wet and you're like, all right, now I know what to do here.
Sure.
How long did it take you to go from idea to writing A Small Favor and getting it published? What were the steps behind that?
2014 was when I started working on the idea for A Small Favor. 2015, late 2015, early 2016 is when I started we started actually commissioning art for it. And then that was kickstarted in 2017. And it wasn't printed until 2018. So I mean, really from conception to printing, it was 4 years, and that was definitely the longest that a comic has taken me to make. So then the next one was faster. The next one was about a year turnaround. Modern Mythology was about a year. Unicorn Vampire Hunter, like if you count when I came up with the idea in 2011, but like from when I actually like decided to make it happen, it's been like less than a year. So things have gotten faster for sure as I've gone on. That first one took about 4 years to make.
And you mentioned earlier that you have like your background, you have your teachers you mentioned, but you also have was it an English, a literature degree?
Yep.
So when you decided to write down A Small Favor, what was the process where you said, I want to make this into a graphic novel or a comic book, not a actual novel? What was the decision behind that?
It's interesting. A Small Favor was like, my friend John Grimes and we decided that we wanted to make a comic book. And then we started trying to think of ideas for what we could do to make a comic. So it was really like we knew we wanted to make a comic, and then the idea for A Small Favor came later, as a result of like deciding what we wanted to do, what kind of comic we wanted to make. And actually, this is maybe sort of a little known anecdote, but originally we were going to make Unicorn Vampire Hunter, because I had written the original idea for Unicorn Vampire Hunter in 2011.
Oh wow.
And so I thought this would be a good comic book, and that was going to be the thing we were going to do, but then ultimately decided not to do Unicorn Vampire Hunter, and we came up with this sci-fi idea instead. And part of the reason that we wanted to do A Small Favor is because A Small Favor is kind of an anthology style comic book. It was all written by me and my friend John, but it was it has a bunch of different artists. Basically, this character lives for 1,000 years, from the Civil War to the distant future, and every different time period in the book is drawn by a different artist. And so we basically wanted the opportunity to tell a bunch of different types of stories and like experiment. Like there's a Western story in there. There's like a 70s moon mission story. There's a Civil War story, and there are sci-fi future stories. And like, so it was like our excuse to sort of experiment and do a lot of different fun stuff. But then ultimately, when I decided that I wanted to make more comics on my own, I thought, why not, return to Unicorn, which was an idea that I had wanted to make into a comic all along. But yeah, so to answer your question, in the long run, A Small Favor was born out of wanting to make a comic and wanting to make something wanting to make a comic that could have a lot of different things in it. And so, yeah, it was very much in a chicken before the egg sort of thing.
That's so that's interesting that so Unicorn Vampire Hunter has been that thing in the back of your head that's been nagging you for years, and then finally you had to, finally put it down. And so once that happened, how many drafts did you take in order to say, all right, this is where it's going to be? And plus, this is going to be an ongoing series. This is going to be, because this is compared to some of your other anthologies, this is pretty thick. This is a 42 pager. So how did you go from that? When you write it down, how many drafts did you have to put in place before you actually started launching to get this book sent out to artists, to the art? Well, you have one artist for this, Darryl Toe, correct?
Darryl Toe, yep. Who's awesome. He's really the perfect artist for this book. And That's a good question because I mean, there have probably been 20 drafts of Unicorn Vampire Hunter as it was originally conceived as a graphic novel, and I wrote a bunch of drafts of it. And if you look on the Kickstarter page, like the preview pages, the one of the scenes in the preview pages is from the original draft. I mean, not verbatim, but pretty close. So some things from the original draft that I wrote have really survived, but there's probably been about 20 drafts. And then last year was when Darryl and I first started talking about doing the book together. But the timing wasn't right. It didn't work out for him to do the book then. And I had a draft ready to go, but since then I have written 2 more drafts, so like revised it further. So this is constant iterating process until it's printed, just like constantly revising and revising and revising until it's printed. And then it's like, all right, now it's locked in. But yeah.
And you and I got to ask you now, I'm going to ask you for your literature hat here. How much of you had to self edit? Did you have any ideas in your draft that just didn't make the cut that you really liked, that you got to say, it's not the right place for this? I like this, whether it be a character or a sequence or something that you said it's. Did you have to edit that out, or did you have somebody that was edited your script for you that helped you with that?
That's a good question. So the script has definitely changed over time, both minor parts and major parts, and some things were my idea to change because I ultimately just decided they didn't work with what I wanted to do, and other things were early drafts I had sent to some people, and I'm fortunate to have some good writer friends who are very critical and really take their time when asked to give feedback, and I was given some really good feedback from people, and where there were things that just really needed to change. I mean, major story elements. I mean, there are major character arcs that have been modified and changed, and like the nature of relationships between characters changed a lot throughout the different drafts. So I mean, it was sort of a combination of like, rethinking about it myself every time, and then also getting feedback from people. I mean, that's just a really huge benefit to surrounding yourself with writer friends, is that they will they'll review your work for you. So yeah.
And so I'm gonna share the screen, and I want to bring people up to just kind of show you a bit of this Kickstarter that you for it. And so, as I say, looking at the Kickstarter for Unicorn Vampire Hunter, I gotta ask the question too, as a from the writing perspective, is how you had the idea, and so did you then create characters, or did you kind of create a world and saying, where would a unicorn vampire hunter live and what would that world look like? Or did you say, I really want to make sure I have these types of protagonists surrounding this character? How did that process go?
The funny thing is that this book was not conceived of as Unicorn Vampire Hunter originally.
Okay.
Yeah, originally, when I first came up with the idea, it was when I was in college, and I had a friend who told me that Martias couldn't possibly be beautiful, and I was feeling snarky, so I decided to write a short story about a beautiful marsh, which is where the wizard in the story lives, and then the fact that there was a unicorn it was just like me, like spitballing, like there was a unicorn, and then like and it slowly became more and more about the unicorn, but the story was originally called Jezebel and the Unicorn, it was a love story about Jezebel and the unicorn. Yeah, and you'll see that at the
right down here. Yeah.
Yep. it is no longer a love story about the Jezebel and the unicorn. Jezebel is still a very important character. The unicorn is obviously the titular character, but it's more of a story about friendship now, sort of an all ages thing. I like to think of it as like a fairy tale or like a Pixar movie. But yeah, I mean, the characters were first and foremost in the story, and everything kind of organically grew out of that. I honestly don't know where the idea for unicorns hunting vampires came from. It just I wanted to write this story about a beautiful magical marsh, and then like somehow I decided that there was a unicorn that hunts vampires there. Yeah.
I mean, and obviously, and it's like, it's, you have it in your preview screen. So if people, go on Kickstarter and check out Unicorn Vampire Hunter, obviously you have to, and this must have been the conversation you had with Darryl by saying, all right, or when you wrote it out, like, I have to have a unicorn stab a vampire through the heart with, its horn. Like, it has, like, it's obvious. It's like it's almost like you have to have that in there. It's like it naturally would happen. There's no shoehorning with that scene. That is like, and I love the fact that you just have it happen in like page 5. Literally, it's like it's not having it build up to a point, but knowing that it is. But also too, the world, like looking at it from visually, it has a steampunk flair to it. So how much of, once you kind of had the idea, how much did you have to step back and actually kind of create the world around that? Like, why did you decide a steampunk world? Why, or, and then kind of creating that? And
yeah. So, the world was originally, I mean, obviously it's like most worlds, I think that people come up with, starts out small with the kernel of an idea. So like the kernel of the world is this magical marsh and the dark forest that's next to it. And then I wanted Jezebel to be there. And I thought, well, why would she be there? Like, she's got this uncle who's this wizard, but like, why did she come to live with him in the first place? And I thought, well, maybe the place that she came from is even more dangerous. And what's more dangerous than like a quaint marsh and a dark forest? And I thought, well, cities are very dangerous. And I think this isn't like a terribly original idea, but there's sort of this trope, I think, in a lot of fantasy novels where like technology is advancing. Like, there's magic, but technology is advancing, like society is advancing. And so in the world of Unicorn Vampire Hunter, magic is on its way out and technology is growing. And so like the steampunk era is kind of taking over. And so Jezebel grew up in a steampunk city, but her parents and her uncle are not from a steampunk world. Like, the world they grew up in was a more of a classic fantasy, like medieval world. And so it's kind of like, the way I've imagined the world is a world that's very much evolving. A world that's seeing less and less magic and more technology. And so Jezebel's parents send her, and in the preview pages on the Kickstarter, this is all in there, but her parents are worried about her safety in the city, so they send her to go live with her uncle. And so she gets this opportunity to kind of like experience her late teenage years in a really idyllic fantasy setting that she wouldn't have gotten to experience in the city. But of course, there are dangers. There in the city, you have to deal with mobs and crime and all this stuff. But in the magical marsh and the dark forest, you have to deal with sinister, evil creatures, which might be just as dangerous or more dangerous.
And how much world building have you had to proactively or passively put in place, like governments in here or magic systems and all this kind of stuff? Have you tried to, like, in the notes that you've already kind of planned out?
There's a decent amount. The magic system in Unicorn Vampire Hunter is a fairly soft magic system. There are definitely rules to it that I have created, but they're not. It's not a super mechanical system. Seamus the Wizard can kind of do magical things like Gandalf. Like Gandalf can do magic, and we never like really learn what the rules of Gandalf's magic are. But he can just do a lot of different things. But he has limits, right? Like he can't do everything. And in my world, I've definitely spelled out some rules, some that are obvious to the reader and some that are not. And then as far as world building goes, there's like some government stuff and some cultural stuff. But I think one of the coolest things about this world and the way that I've built it is that it's expansive. It can be many things. It doesn't have hard edges to it. So there's a lot of places that the story can go. I would say that like as if there's one rule that I established for the world, it's that magic always has a price. And that ends up being very central to the story and sort of the fairy tale that I'm telling.
And I'm looking at this and looking at the artwork and things is like how much. So let me just talk a little bit about your working with Darryl. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was pulling up some of your previous anthologies. I didn't see Darryl in any of the artists. Was he an artist in any of your previous ones?
Darryl did one piece of art for Modern Mythology, just a pinup, and then he also did a variant cover for me for Modern or for A Small Favor. So I've known Darryl, but I haven't worked with him to this extent. I met Darryl through Greg Anderson Elise, who writes a comic called Is Nana the Werespider, which is really great. And Darryl did most of the artwork on volume 2 of that book. So that's sort of how I had the connection with him. But no, I had never done a full comic with Darryl before. Okay.
And how much did your script actually change from Darryl's art? Like, did he ever say, hey, this would make sense to have, have Uncle Seamus, dressed like this? Or how much of this of like the design of having some of the was it in the script to say, some of the vampires are in the city or even looking at issue 2 or 3, how much did he come back to you through email or phone or whatever and just say, hey, I was thinking about doing this with the scene. What do you think?
The way that goes, it's interesting because I've worked with a lot of artists and a lot of artists have different processes. Darryl and I designed the characters together for this book. And so I knew the characters' names and their personalities, but a lot of the visual elements of the characters are very much designed by Darryl. And then when it came to the pages, I sent Darryl the script and he got back to me we had a few long conversations where we talked about story stuff, where he said, I like this and I like that. And I think maybe this would work better, like structurally as a story. Like maybe this would work better. Or this would work better. But then when it came to after we had that big long discussion, I made some more changes to the script based on some things that he wanted to see or like ideas that he had. And then when I actually wrote the script and sent it to him, Darryl is crazy good. I mean, he's so good. It's almost like he's a mind reader because I'll write a script and I'll send it to him, and then he'll come back to me, and there will be stuff in the panels that like I had imagined but hadn't really explained that well in the script.
That's cool.
Yeah. So he like and I mean, like when you're working with any artist, I mean, maybe not any artist, but typically my experience is, an artist will come back to you with thumbnails or pencils, and then that gives you an opportunity to kind of like give some notes. But for the most part with Darryl, I have almost no notes. It always ends up being like so spot on to what I was imagining, or it's better than what I was imagining.
Right.
But we definitely did most of the collaboration in terms of story stuff that we did was early on, before the drawing started. And the stuff like that there being vampires in the forest, or I mean in the city, or like or there are some extra vampires in the background in the forest, and little touches like this were things that I didn't necessarily put in the script, but that were definitely excellent additions. That they like add some depth to the world, and some of it ends up being like Darryl is very attentive to the script. So in the very end of the issue, there's like a mention of that like vampires had moved into the city, and so he incorporated that in the early pages, even though it like was really only in the script near the end, but it sets it up. So it's like that just goes to show that, you know, he's not just like reading one page at a time and drawing each page. I mean, he really takes his time to like dig into a script and understand it before he starts, which is really awesome.
And talk to us a bit about how Darryl works with then Dave, or do you work with Dave directly about how to get the lettering in? So was it Darryl or Dave that put in the hiss word in the clop, 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 clip, clop, clip, clop?
That's all Dave. The sound effects are Dave, and all the lettering is Dave. And the way that works is typically I pass Darryl will give me the art files, and then I'll pass them on to Dave, and then Dave will do a lettering pass, and then I will show them to Darryl, and that way Darryl has a chance to take a look at them and see like, oh, this isn't quite what I was imagining, or I think this would work better there, or something like that, which is really helpful. And then sometimes I'll make Dave do more work if things didn't. But I mean, Dave is really good. Dave is super professional, and he's super fast. I met Dave because one of the writers and who worked on Modern Mythology brought Dave on to do lettering for that book for one story. And then I got to know Dave through that project. And now Dave just like follows me around waiting for me to announce a new project so he can claim it as his too and be the letterer on it. Which is great, because before I met Dave, I would always have to find a letterer every time I had a project. And that was always like, you know, a whole process. And now I just have Dave.
It's good always to have a Dave. That's good. Yeah. Now let me ask you though, how often do so for the people that are listening that want to do in comic book writing or kind of do what you do, where you kind of get some people together, how from the lettering perspective, I got to show this. Here you go, Dave. How often does working with Dave, does he come back to say, short this down, there's no way I'm going to be able to fit this entire dialogue into 2 boxes or 2 frames? How does that conversation ever happen? Or now you've kind of figured out the rhythm to say, I know every word bubble has to have this many, or how's that dance happen?
I don't know. I like to think that over the years of writing comics, I've gotten pretty good at figuring out what can fit on a page and what can't. And I would say like any good letterer, Dave included, will be able to just sort of make executive decisions in terms of like, oh, there's too much text in this panel, and I'm going to get creative with where that text is actually going to go. I'm like very trusting when I work with people. Like if I'm working with an artist or like a letterer like Dave, and if they come to me and say like, you know, I think that maybe we ought to do this or we ought to do that, my answer is typically like, you know better than I do. Like, you know, you just like do it. If you think it's a good idea, then do it. But No, I don't think we've had any issues where there's been too much text somewhere. Typically, what typically happens with Dave is that he'll send me something, or he'll have some idea, like something new and different, and he'll send it to me. And if I don't like it, I'll respond and I'll say I hate it, and then he'll and then Dave gives me a certain allotment of how many times I'm allowed to hate something per project. Yeah.
So is this your team for the next for this series then? Are you it's Dave and Darryl? So
Dave and Darryl, that's the team. And
are you because of because of your studio that you've kind of headed here, the Enkidu Studio, is there other projects, because you have a wide array of like a small favor you had Kyle Serafolian, is that? Yep. Do you have other projects that you're kind of doing at the same time that's happening here, that you have now that you found your rhythm? Are you like, all right, this is going to happen, now this is going to happen? Are you, now that you kind of created these teams?
Absolutely. I have I'm working on another project right now that's unannounced. It's another fantasy book with an artist named Jonathan Fisher, who did these stickers. He did those, and I'm doing a fantasy comic with him that's a King Arthur book. That's sort of that, spoiler alert, I haven't talked about it publicly, but we're working on that, which is going to be sometime next year, coming to Kickstarter, like after the first issue of Unicorn is fully out to backers. I'll be talking about this other, which is a standalone graphic novel. That one's not going to be single issues, but so I've got that going, and then Modern Mythology is getting a second iteration as well.
Okay, so you don't want to make a Storycomic Presents exclusive, announcement or anything now?
Sure. Why not? The book that I've got coming out next year is called Swords of Arthur, the Knight and the Lion. And that's going to be a book that I'm doing with Jonathan Fisher and, of course, Dave Lentz.
Wow. Cool. Look at that. Heard it here. This is it. The first announcement of that. That's exciting. And make sure you come back on Storycomic Presents, and we'll talk about that too in the spring. So
all right.
So talk to us. So talk to us a bit about the, as you mentioned before, you create these teams, but friends are friends, but business is business. Do you still, even though you've worked with, as you mentioned, you've worked with Dave and Darryl before, do you still make a contract, or is it still kind of a handshake thing where you say, here's a contract, we need to have this signed? How does that work from a business perspective for you?
Yeah, there's contracts. I mean, part of it is when you're doing stuff for hire, like I'm hiring these guys to work on the project, and so we have a contract, and like the contracts are always different. It's something that I discuss with everybody that I work with, like the exact details of what that's going to look like. But I'm a big believer in contracts. Even if, like, the thing is, we're all small fish. It's not like if anybody broke their contract, there's really that much recourse in terms of like legal stuff, like what it's worth to do. But I like the idea of like setting things down in writing and saying like, this is the deal that we have. So I do typically, I'm like less I'm less extra about it now than I was in the beginning. When I first started doing comics, I would always have a contract for everything, and now it's like a little looser, but depending on the deal, because I want to make sure also everybody's getting, their due, like everybody that I work with. I mean, when I do anthologies, people submit stories, and then they get certain things in compensation in return for submitting to an anthology that I do, and then certain projects are more collaborative than others in terms of like ownership. It's a case-by-case basis, but yeah, I definitely do contracts.
Yeah. And I did, and just to show, like on your Kickstarter, which is great, aspects of transparency now is showing. I mean, it's, the human capital of it is the lion's share of the Kickstarter.
Oh yeah.
And you do mention in one of your previous, you did write a blog post that, if people want to go to, check out Caleb's stuff here, he has Enkidu. Am I saying it right? I just want to make sure I'm saying your name.
Enkidu.
It's Enkidu.
Enkidu.
Enkidu. Okay. Enkidu. Did I say it right?
Yep.
Okay. Enkidustudio.com. Check it out. You can see all of his stuff here. Small Favor, Unicorn, Vampire Hunter, Modern Mythology. He also has some good blog posts. He has some great press on here as well. One of the things you mentioned in there on how to get, how to do this is networking. So in the age where we are now, what would be some advice that you would give to comic book writers or people that want to do what you're doing? What's some of the advice you'd give them, and how would you do your networking and making these legitimate and intimate connections with artists in a virtual environment now that
Right. That's a good question. So I actually originally started making friends in comics before I ever started going to conventions. And conventions are a great way to meet people and to make connections. But online, I mean, Facebook is a great way. There's a lot of groups, and I guess just like start talking to people. Most people like appreciate having conversations about stuff. Yeah, I would say join the Facebook groups, and if you're an artist, one piece of great advice that I got was like draw fan art of other people's indie comics. That gets conversations started. Yeah, that's something that Walter Osley told me. Walter Osley is the artist on the book Metal Shark Bro. And he's a good friend of mine. Yeah, I mean, just start conversations with people on, and like potentially anthology projects are a good way to meet people. And those are good opportunities usually for people who are just starting out. But I would say like my main piece of advice would be like, if you're going to write comics, be ready to spend some money. This is like a hard pill to swallow. But if you're writing indie comics and and you don't have like an amazing publishing deal, which you're not going to have if you don't have any credentials, then be ready to spend some money. And because if you go to artists and you and ask them to do art for free, you're going to have a rough time. You're not going to find artists who are really willing to work with you for free. Like there's this idea of having like a 50-50 split, like a back end split on a thing, but the lion's share of the work goes to the artist. And if you have no evidence, no artist has any way of knowing if a project that you do is going to be successful if you've never done a successful project before. So I would say be ready to spend some money. That like ultimately, and if you're asking an artist to spend 100 hours working on a project, you got to like they have to be compensated in some way for that. Unless you're willing to wait a long time, you might find someone who's willing to do a project for you for free, but they might not be reliable, they might not be that talented. And everybody's got to cut their teeth somewhere. But my recommendation would be to save some money while you're writing. Just like write a lot, save some money, be ready to pay somebody.
And I think you, in one of your blog posts, and it was a couple of years old, but do you still feel as though that it's the range is still like $100 to $250 per page?
Yeah, it depends. I would say if you're talking about a full color page that's also lettered, then yeah. What I would say an update to that advice would be don't spend $250 a page on your first book. Just don't. It's too much money. If you're talking to an artist who says that they need to charge you $250 a page, I'm not even saying that that's a bad amount of money to charge. Like that's like if an artist is worth that much money, they should be paid that much money. But maybe find someone who's willing to do it for less, because your first project, unless it's just like, unless all the stars align, you're not going to make money on your first project. And so it's not going to be worth it to spend that much money per page. I would try to aim for, like $100 to $150 for like for everything from pencils to inks to coloring to lettering, because otherwise you're just going to bankrupt yourself. You got to spend money, but you don't want to spend too much money. And I definitely did that with my very first graphic novel. I spent too much money.
Right.
Walter Osley bled me dry. If he's listening, I'm just kidding. He wasn't even the most expensive one. And also Walter is, like I said, a very good friend of mine.
Yeah.
But
and do you have when it's like the old adage, good, fast, and cheap, pick two. So it's, if you want it good and fast, then it's not going to be cheap. So like you said, if the longer you give, the longer the window of somebody, that's also a part of the negotiating technique. Is I can give you. What would you consider then as somebody who's listening who has a writing is like, this is great, Caleb. What's your range of, got the price range, but what's the time range? Where would you point where you say that you want to keep it? What's that nice middle time? Is it based off of weeks or months? What would you say is a good middle of the road time that you can feel as though that you'll keep somebody engaged, like someone you contract with engaged?
Like it really depends. I would say if you're doing like a single issue, like somewhere between 20 and 30 pages, like the hope would be that you'd be able to get that done in 3 months. Artists who draw for like Marvel and DC, who are just churning out pages and doing an issue a month or 2 issues a month, are obviously drawing a lot faster than that. But you have to consider, how much are you paying people? Is it their full-time job? Like how, all these different factors. And so I work with people who work at different speeds. And what I try to do is I try to get an idea of how fast somebody's going to work and how reliable they're going to be. And then I plan my project based on that. So like I work with, if I'm working with someone that I've worked with before, I have a good idea of how fast they're going to be. And so I can plan things based on that. But if I'm working with someone that I've never worked with before, or I haven't worked with a lot, I am not going to feel comfortable really like launching a Kickstarter or heavily promoting a project until it's basically done already. Because otherwise you just don't know. If I have like 100-page graphic novel and I'm working with artists I've never worked with before, and then I launch a Kickstarter, but then it turns out that it's going to take them 2 years to draw it, and I didn't know that.
Right.
That puts me in a rough position.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more about your Unicorn Vampire Hunter.
Yeah.
Let's go through a bit with the your pledges. Let's this is, as I got to say, because you do mention in the actual video that you're pretty excited about some of these tier rewards. Do you want to talk to us a bit about this?
Yeah. Okay. So basically, obviously we've got just the digital level, and then there's just the book, which of course is 42 pages long. Yeah. There's 34 pages of actual story in the book, and then I have a bunch of bonus materials. And then the cover is this really cool wraparound cover that Darryl did right there. Yep. And then I have 3 variant covers. So the first variant cover that I commissioned was from Jonathan Fisher, and it's what I call the Vampire Bros variant cover, which has the 2 antagonists of the book on the cover. And then and that was his idea. I hired him and I said, give me a variant cover, any of the characters you want, do what you want. And this was his idea, that he wanted to do the vampires. And so then I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if I also had a cover that had the wizard on it, so that there was like covers that featured all the different characters. And so I hit up David Brame, who's one of my favorite artists, and just a really nice guy. And he drew this great variant cover of Seamus the Wizard, and then the last cover is the Zombie Hunter variant cover. So Zombie Hunter is there's a book called Mr. Guy Zombie Hunter that's drawn by JL Draco, who is a good friend of mine, and we're actually collaborating on a project coming up that's called the Zombie Adoption Program. It's a subscription-based program where you can adopt a zombie like the way you would adopt an endangered wolf. And every month you'll get updates on how that zombie is doing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so he offered to draw this variant cover, and I thought it would be really funny if vampire was just crossed out with spray paint and zombie was written over top of it on the cover. So he's like slaying a zombie on the cover of that one. And then so those are like the main reward tiers, is each of those covers. And then I also have a level that includes these trading cards that Dave designed with all the different characters, and then this the vinyl sticker that Jonathan did.
Okay.
And then I have a level that gets you all the things, all the covers, and all the bonus stuff all together. And then there's one more level. The highest level on the Kickstarter is you get all that stuff plus all my other books that I've ever done. So yeah, those are the levels on the Kickstarter.
Yeah, and so you have, I mean, looking at that, it's like your pledge level of $80 for the complete author collection. All of these things individually would cost well over $80.
Oh yeah, oh for sure. It's like I always like to do that when I do Kickstarters, and the more of them I do, the more things I can offer. I definitely do steep discounts when people are getting all the stuff together. And the thing is, like, a small favor, even though like I'm doing something that's completely different now, I love a small favor. I mean, like, the characters in a small favor are like very near and dear to me. I mean, they exist so vibrantly in my mind that they're like my friends, and I like, and so if I can get those books into people's hands, then I'm very excited to do that. And a small favor has never really got the reception that I was hoping for, but if I'm always holding out a little bit of hope that if new people come along and pick it up, that there eventually will be a demand for me to return to that world and tell more stories in it. Because a small favor is, I really like it. I think that Unicorn Vampire Hunter is the best writing I've done, but I can't help but have a place in my heart for a small favor.
So, as a writer, let me ask you this: is a small favor Unicorn Vampire Hunter? Is this part of a larger Palmquist-diverse? Are they separate? Like, is there any Easter eggs that you'll put into your small favor friends? Like anything that you'll ask Darryl to say, hey, can you draw a little bit of this? Is there any plans on doing anything like that?
No, not really. I think that a small favor and Unicorn Vampire Hunter are very distinct things. I think that like you might be able to recognize some influences that are similar between the two of them, but I think, and like themes that are similar. But I think that no, that they're very separate and distinct.
Okay.
Things, and they're also very different. I mean, a small favor is this like space opera mystery story, and Unicorn Vampire Hunter is it's a fairy tale, and it's an all ages comic. Small favor is not an all ages comic. It's not inappropriate, but it's not an all ages comic. And Unicorn Vampire Hunter is definitely designed and written to be an all ages comic for sure.
So, just dreaming about that, just looking at this is like I gotta ask you too. Is there other media that you're thinking about with Unicorn Vampire Hunter, like tabletop role playing games, board games, anything that the theme itself? It's funny because it's adult. There's like this, but you have the childlike wonder of a unicorn with the action of a vampire hunter. That's falls on so many levels. You've got to be thinking there at night like, oh, I want to do this or I want to do this. What are some of the other dreams that you're having about this as an IP?
Oh man, that's a good question. I don't know. To be honest, with this particular thing, I haven't thought that far ahead, but I will say that one of the things that I spend most of my free time doing is playing tabletop games.
Yeah.
I'm really into RPGs. I'm really into board games, and I've always wanted to design a board game or a card game. It's very daunting. Games are more expensive to make than comics are, but I wouldn't rule it out. If people respond well to this, certainly a role-playing game is in the cards. And I have been wanting to design a role-playing game for some time, so maybe it'll be a Unicorn Vampire Hunter one. I don't know. That's a good question.
I mean, because you are talking about this is ripe for being a tabletop role playing game. But you're right though when it comes to board games, like you go on those Kickstarters and people are like, if you get an example here, it's like you're talking about when people are putting together comic books, it's like I need $5,000. I need $5,000 to get this ready. You go to like those the board games on Kickstarter, like I need a minimum of $100,000 to get this off the ground because there's so much involved in board games. So, but I would love to see that. I would love to see a tabletop. This is ripe to be a tabletop role playing game. That would be so fun to do that. So, wow.
Yeah, for sure. I would. I'm not ruling it out for sure.
Yeah, because you get the artist, and the hardest part is like the hard part's over. You finding the artist, finding the world. Yep. That part's there. Now it's just finding building a system that fits that. So, well, we've already knocking on an hour already, Caleb. So this went by quick.
Yeah.
So, where can people find you? Where can people find? Right now, I think you can go to. Unicorn. You Google Unicorn Vampire Hunter, and this is going to be the only thing that's going to be popping up.
Yeah, definitely. I don't have a huge social media presence. I'm on Facebook, Instagram at Caleb Palmquist. I don't really tweet. But if you go to unicornvampirehunter.com, enkidustudio.com, smallfavorcomic.com, all of those will redirect you to the same place almost. But yeah, Unicorn Vampire Hunter is the main thing. And then, like you said, my website, which I think is like a pretty website, but it's I don't know if it gets a ton of traffic, but it does have everything. I mean, I make sure to keep it updated with links to all of the things. Like when this goes up on your website, there will be a link to this in the podcast or in the press section. And I'm glad that you found it useful. That I had all that organized. I like to be able to point people to that. Yeah.
Thanks again, Caleb. As I say, please check out the faster we can get this, get this goal, the more better night's sleeps that Caleb can have, because it's going to be a pretty rough next 30 days. Yeah. But check it out. Absolutely. As you say, it's an all ages book, Unicorn Vampire Hunter. Guaranteed this is probably going to be the best gift you can give to your nieces, your nephews, your daughters, your sons, your aunts, your uncles. It's an all ages book, and it's fun. People who love unicorns, people who love steampunk, people who love good stories, people who love vampires. You cannot find this is a cross-platform, cross-genre, fun, exciting. It's going to be an ongoing series. So perfect. Well, thank you very much, Caleb. It was fun. We're going to be following this, and good luck to you for the next 30 days on this. And I don't want to jinx anything by saying anything that'll thing, but I think it's going really well. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. I got to ask you though, Caleb. I'm super curious about the outlet that's halfway up the wall behind you.
Oh,
It's so bizarre.
I don't know why that is there. I have no idea. I couldn't tell you.
I'm wondering. It must have been like a shelf or something there. Sometimes you'll see them if it's there with like plugging in like clocks or something as well, or something like that. But
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I used to have this poster that fell off the wall. Part of the frame broke, but I have this like poster from my childhood. This unicorn poster that I usually have up behind me.
Oh, okay. Oh, that would have been nice to talk about Unicorn Vampire Hunter.
Yeah.